Hello everyone, it is June 4th, 2014, and this is one of the bonus sessions of our DCMOOC. And welcome everybody who's decided to join us. We've got a small but mighty group tonight, and there's probably more people that will be joining us in a bit here once they get the word of the session. Tonight we have a very special guest. We have Matthew Johnson from Media Smarts, and I'm going to take a bio from his page. He's the Director of Education at Media Smarts, which is something we actually talked about today, and that the Saskatchewan government has now a license with Media Smarts, and so it's something that's going to be really important for us to understand. Matthew Johnson is the Director of Education for Media Smarts. He's Canada Centre for Digital and Media Literacy. He's the designer of the Comprehensive Digital Literacy Tutorials, Passport to the Internet, which is made for grades 4 to 8, and My World, which is grades 9 to 12. He has contributed blogs and articles to websites and magazines around the world, as well as presenting Media Smarts materials on topics such as copyright, cyberbullying, body image, and online hate to parents, journalists, academics, and government bodies in Canada and around the world. If you want to learn more about Matthew, there's actually a bio there which I've read from. There's even some more information out there on Matthew. So I'm going to, this may be his first time in Blackboard Collaborate, but I'm sure he's used online tools before and in similar things like this. So I'm going to pass it on to Matthew, and you can take the floor. And if you have any questions, please let us know. And of course, like every day, if people want to contribute to the chat, feel free to do that. And you can pull the chat window out if you want to do that as well. Makes it a little bit easier. So feel free to comment throughout, and there will be Katya and Joanna here to help answer your questions if you have others. So thanks and welcome everybody, and I'll pass it to you, Matt.
Thank you. Thank you very excuse me. Thank you very much, and thank you all for joining us on this Wednesday evening. If anyone can just let me know via the chat if you're hearing me all right, or how about if anyone who isn't hearing me all right can let me know by chat. All right, that's great. So we're talking tonight about digital citizenship. Of course, I know that's the general topic of the MOOC that you've been participating in, but I'm going to be talking about digital citizenship from Media Smarts' perspective, how we approach digital citizenship and how it relates specifically to digital literacy, and that's going to work its way around to a brief discussion of some of the resources that we've created for teachers and schools to use to promote digital literacy and digital citizenship. So Media Smarts, if you're not familiar with us, we are a Canadian nonprofit organization. We actually started out as part of the National Film Board many, many years ago, spun out into a separate nonprofit. We were for many years the Media Awareness Network. Some of you may remember us under that name. A couple of years ago we rebranded as Media Smarts. And as you can see, our mission is really all about critical thinking that enables young people to engage the media that they consume, both the traditional media and the digital media that more and more is becoming a big part of both how they consume media and the media they consume. And of course, that critical thinking is a big part of citizenship because it is about stopping and asking questions, both critical questions and, as we'll see, ethical questions. A lot of what I'm going to be saying tonight comes out of our Young Canadians in a Wired World research. So I'm going to pause for a minute to talk about that. This is an ongoing research project. It's actually been happening for 15 years now. We started in 1999. We've done 3 phases. We're currently wrapping up phase 3. Phase 1 was in 2000, was published in 2001. Phase 2, we got the data in 2004, was published in 2005. Phase 3 has taken us actually from 2011 till now. We started with a series of teacher interviews and focus groups with parents and youth, and then of course the biggest part of it has been our survey of more than 5,000 young people, 5,000 students in grades 4 to 11 with participation from every province and territory in the country. And so that's where a lot of the data I'll be talking about tonight came from. If you're interested, We have all of the reports so far. The data has been organized into thematic reports on a wide variety of topics: cyberbullying, privacy, digital literacy, life online. We just released one on sexuality and romantic relationships. All of these are available directly from our website, mediasmarts.ca, and we also have connected them a whole bunch of infographics that will get these ideas across quickly. We have tip sheets that connect to a lot of them. We have articles and blogs that go into things with a little more interpretation. So there's a lot of rich material there if you're interested in this data. And obviously, I think it's pretty interesting. So when we talk about digital citizenship, what we really mean is that we have to change our focus. For a long time, people in the online education and the internet education field talked about online safety, and it's still really the dominant model. And when we look at our data from young people, we know they've got that message loud and clear because they tell us, as we'll see, they tell us, especially girls, that they are worried about being online. They don't feel safe. They feel like they can take care of themselves, but they don't feel safe. And a lot of that is because we've been scaring them because of that online safety model. But as I'm going to show you, that's something we need to drop. We need to change that focus from protecting them to empowering them through digital literacy and digital citizenship skills. So it's important that digital citizenship is not just, it's not something we're adding. It's actually something that needs to replace the existing model. So what's wrong with safety? Why should we have to replace the online safety model? Well, to begin with, we know that scare tactics don't work with youth. Here's a quote, a quote from our focus groups. We know that when you use scare tactics to try to communicate with youth, they just tune you out. And in fact, they take the issue less seriously. We had quite a few people tell us that they took cyberbullying less seriously because they had been exposed to these scare tactics. They were told that cyberbullying would always result in suicide and so on. In fact, there's actually some research that came out just today. It was published by the London Society of Economics, and it found that when media and educators dwell on the low frequency, that is the uncommon, extreme risks, it actually leads to young people being less safe because they take steps to protect themselves from these very low risk, very uncommon dangers, and they don't take steps to protect themselves or to manage the much more common risks. So they don't understand what they're actually protecting themselves from. So that's one of the reasons why these scare tactics actually make kids less safe. Another issue about safety, another reason why we have to abandon that model, is because the implication of the safety model is surveillance. And we heard this loud and clear from our focus groups, that parents again and again told us they felt they had to spy on their kids, because they felt that if they didn't spy on their kids and something went wrong, they would be blamed. They would, it's all at mediasmarts.ca/YCWW. Oh no, that one is, actually I'm going to run that one in the MediaSmarts News tomorrow if you're subscribed. If not, you can go to our website and sign up for MediaSmarts News Digest. For those of you who don't know it, brief tangent, we run 4 to 6 links to media and digital literacy related news items every day, well, 5 days a week. Anyway, so going back, we know that the safety model implies surveillance. We know parents told us again and again that they felt the need to spy on their kids, and kids told us they felt spied on. They felt it was just the fact of life because they had bought the safety model hook, line, and sinker too. But you lose a lot of trust, and you have a lot of reasons to believe that kids who are under surveillance are more likely to try to hide things from their parents. And kids who aren't under surveillance, who feel their parents trust them, are more likely to come to their parents when something goes wrong. Another issue with safety, well, we know that when there is heavy filtering, particularly in a school environment, but also most likely in a home environment, it actually prevents kids from learning how to protect themselves and how to deal with the situations that they encounter in unfiltered environments. Now that doesn't mean we have to turn off filters entirely, particularly at schools, but there was a great study out of the UK that found that the schools that were most effective in preparing kids for the issues they faced online were the ones that did what they called managed filtering. So they did have some filtering. The teachers had a lot of leeway in what was allowed, and in particular, students were taught what to do when they came upon a site that they knew was inappropriate, that made them feel uncomfortable in some way. So there was a procedure, so they knew they weren't going to get blamed for it. They were told there's this button, they had created a macro or some kind of command to cover up the screen. I guess it went straight to a screensaver or something like that. So they were saying if you wind up somewhere you don't want to be, do this and go tell a teacher and you won't be in trouble. And those were the schools that had the best results when it came to actually preparing kids for the real online challenges they face. And besides, we know that to begin with, filters prevent kids from getting at valuable information. This is from our most recent survey. This is in the digital literacy report. More than a third of kids had trouble finding material they needed because of school blocking. And a quarter of those kids also felt that they could get past the filters if they wanted to. Our teacher interviews told us that teachers were very frustrated often because they were trying to get at legitimate material, things on Twitter and YouTube, things they wanted to use in class, and they couldn't because of filtering. So it really does seem to a large extent that the filters in schools are mostly a problem for the teachers and not necessarily the students. So when we're talking about digital literacy, what do we mean? Well, this is a very busy chart. I'm not going to ask you to read the whole thing right now. This is on our website if you go to our website and look up digital literacy. But basically, we break digital literacy into three main components, and that is use, understand, and create. Use is the ability simply to use not just the technology, but the digital platforms. So when we look at young people and we see that they very quickly pick up how to use a new social network, a new device, that's that form of digital literacy. The second element of digital literacy is the ability to understand the digital content that they encounter. They actively engage with it, they're able to decode it, they're able to be critical of it in the same way that for many years we as media literacy educators have taught them to understand, engage with, decode, and deconstruct traditional media products. And the final element of digital literacy is to create, the ability to create content, and that can be anything from creating a status update on Facebook to creating videos, mashups, all kinds of original creative material. And we also group civic participation under create. So if you're supporting a group, whether it's an online group or an offline group or both, whether you're politically active, whether you're active in your community online, that falls under create. Here's another view of digital literacy education, and that is the idea that everything proceeds from the premise that what you say and do online matters. And out of that we get many implications. And as you can see, we like these implications better than the implications of the safety model. Things like empathy, civic engagement, critical thinking, ethics and responsibility, choice. This is the connection between digital literacy and digital citizenship. So what do we mean by digital citizenship? The key idea of digital citizenship is that it's ethical decision-making skills, a personal morality that students can take with them when they're no longer our students, that our children can take with them when they're no longer under our roofs, so that they know what to do when there are no rules and there are no restrictions on their behavior, when their internet isn't filtered. Here's one definition of digital citizenship. It's one of the earliest ones, as you can see. It's 6 years old, but it's Nancy Willard, who you probably are familiar with already, of course, did some of the really groundbreaking work in digital citizenship as a model, and is still working in that field. And her definition was, well, they keep themselves safe. So you can see still the influence of safety is still there, and of course it is an important element. They do the right things, and they take responsibility for others in the digital community. Let's look at keeping themselves safe. This is what students in our survey had to say about online safety. And this is broken down by gender. You can see girls are a lot less likely than boys, as the two bars on the left, to feel that the internet was a safe place for them. Because they're getting the safety messages we've seen loud and clear. And they were much, much more likely, 82% compared to 63%, to feel that they could be hurt if they talk to someone they don't know online. So what this tells us is that we don't really need to be teaching kids that much more about the need to keep themselves safe. How to keep themselves safe is another matter. Because we know from our own research and from research that's been done elsewhere that we do need to educate kids, parents, policymakers about what the actual risks are. At the same time, high percentages, 9 out of 10, agree with the statement, I know how to protect myself online. So there's an interesting kind of contradiction, where they do feel scared, they feel worried. Even the boys, as you saw, do feel concerned in many cases, but they also feel they know how to protect themselves. And that is pretty common when we look at their attitudes towards online risks. They feel, yes, this is real, yes, this is a danger, yes, this is a problem, but not for me. And we hear that again and again when it comes to cyberbullying, when it comes to sexting. In a lot of these cases, they're able to recognize the issue, but they distance themselves from it. We do know that when it comes to a lot of the behaviors that we've been concerned about from a safety measure, from a safety standpoint, kids aren't engaging in them. So we know that kids aren't giving out their contact information. We've identified that for a long time as a risk. We don't know necessarily if that is a risk, but we know they're not doing it. They're keeping themselves, they're keeping their personal information private. And a very small number of them are sending texts. So this is from our most recent report. We asked only students in grades 7 to 11, and only students with cell phone access. And of course that changes as they get older. So the youngest ones, it's well over 50%, but relatively low. By grade 11, it's about 90%. We asked them, have you ever sent a sext of yourself to someone? And we came up to about 8% on average. Now that actually, not surprisingly, that changes tremendously with age. It's 2% in grade 7, and it goes up to 15% by grade 11. The average is 8%. But of course, even though that number is low, we see that fully a quarter have forwarded it. So what that tells us, again, is that one of the problems with the safety model is that it puts all of the emphasis on young people to protect themselves and on authority figures, parents, teachers, administrators, policymakers, to protect them. Where it doesn't place enough emphasis is on the people who may be doing the harm. And this is a problem because, of course, that's where we need to intervene. And that's where taking an ethical approach is a better way of addressing things. Turning to doing the right thing. Remember, that was our second element of digital citizenship. Sorry about that, minor childcare crisis. So looking back at our second element, doing the right thing, was the second element of digital citizenship in Willard's definition. And here's what we found about mean and cruel behaviors. Now, the reason we asked about mean and cruel behaviors instead of cyberbullying was because we know that kids don't use the term cyberbullying. And we know Dana Boyd's research on our own focus groups showed this. We know that they're very good at defining whatever they do as not being cyberbullying. So we asked them very specifically about, did you do something mean or cruel? So we asked them, had they been recipients of mean or cruel behavior, and had they been mean or cruel to anyone online. And again, we see there's a disparity. We don't know whether that's because people are more willing to admit to having been targets, but it's pretty clear that a significant number of kids are experiencing mean and cruel online behavior. And that again shows us why we have to place the emphasis on kids' own responsibility towards others rather than focusing on protecting them. This is really interesting when we get to the reasons. Well, the number one reason is, I was just joking. The second and third, the person said something mean about me first, and the person said something mean about one of my friends first. And again, that tells us that a lot of the times, what we see as cyberbullying doesn't necessarily fit the pattern that we imagine it to. And that really, we have to take an approach that revolves around empathy so that we get around that just joking. Once we feel empathy for other people, it becomes less possible to say, I was just joking as a justification for being mean. And we also need to teach kids emotional regulation so that they don't contribute to a spiral of online conflict. Looking at cyberbullying, we asked them how they had learned to deal with cyberbullying, and part of the good news here was that teachers are seen very highly as a source of information. They're actually number one ahead of parents, and that's almost unique. There were very, very few subjects where kids said they had learned, more kids said they had learned from their teachers than from their parents. We also know that it is possible to have an influence on kids' online behavior. One of the things we found consistently in almost every case was that if there was a rule in the house relating to a certain behavior, students were less likely to engage in that behavior. In particular, if there was a rule about treating others with respect online, students were less likely, significantly less likely to be mean or cruel online, and somewhat less likely to threaten people online. So what we do as adults, the ways we communicate our expectations, our culture, its values, does have an influence on what kids do. The flip side of this, 2/3 of kids report their schools have rules or policies for cyberbullying. Now that doesn't mean that 38% don't, because the second top was I don't know. So in a lot of cases, kids simply do not know whether or not there's a policy or a rule. But unlike household rules, school rules have a little correlation between whether or not kids engage in or experience mean, cruel, or threatening online behavior. So even in cases where there are rules, and kids were generally positive towards school rules, if they did have a rule, generally they felt that the rules were making a difference. But when you look at actual behavior, the rules don't appear to. Let's look at doing the right thing. Remember, we looked at have you sent a text when we were talking about keeping yourself safe. Well, doing the right thing, now we see the flip side of that. 1/4 of students told us that they had sent someone a sexy nude or partially nude photo. And of those 15%, 1 in 6 had forwarded it. a significant number of those obviously were getting out to other people because 1 in 5 had received a forwarded sext. Now that was a bit of a surprise actually. More kids had received a sext directly from the sender than had received from a forwarder. It kind of goes against our idea that when sexts get around, they are spread mostly by forwarding, and it does seem like a slightly larger number are just being sent by the original sender. But still, having it forwarded is obviously the case where there is the most harm, and that's where we need to intervene primarily. And what's most concerning is that, unlike mean and cruel behavior, there's no relationship between the respect rule and whether or not people forward sext. You can see it's a difference of 3%, which is basically insignificant. So it really does seem as though for young people who do forward sexts, they don't see it as an ethical issue. They don't perhaps see the people who created the sext as worthy of respect. And that's something where we absolutely do have to intervene. We have to help them make sure they see it as an ethical issue, as an issue of empathy. And particularly, we have to look at the ideas we have about gender and sexuality that make it possible for people to see someone who sent a sext as not worthy of respect. Because that's something that we hear a lot in research from around the world, that there is a real double standard when it comes to sex. That when boys send a sext, even if it gets out, even if it's made public, and we know in fact from our research that boys' sexts are somewhat more likely to be forwarded. But even when that happens, the research has shown that there's very little negative feedback. There's very little consequence for boys, whereas for girls, it really can have a tremendous negative consequence. There's really a lot of sexual shaming that happens when girls' sexts become public. What are the kind of things we could use to address this idea of doing the right thing as a core issue of digital citizenship? Well, social emotional learning, I already mentioned that. But we're seeing more and more how important it is in the digital realm as well as offline. This is a great quote from Mary Gordon, that empathy is not something we can teach, but we can foster it, we can encourage it. And we can promote it. There are activities, there are exercises we can use that encourage and foster empathy. Another really important tool that we have as educators, as administrators, as people who influence public policy is social norming. We know from terrific research done in the United States that when youth are made aware of how uncommon bullying is, rates drop. Young people consistently overestimate how common a lot of negative behaviors are. They overestimated, for instance, how many people smoked, particularly how many young people smoked, and when the true numbers were publicized, smoking rates dropped significantly. We've seen this is happening. This has happened with bullying, and this is something that we can do in a lot of cases. A lot of problematic behaviors, bullying, sexting, plagiarism, they are less common than students think. And when we help educate young people that these are not normal behaviors, then the rates can drop. Let's take a look at another definition of digital citizenship, because one of the problems I have with Willard's definition, although it is a good and a valuable one, but one of the places where I feel it's limited is that it doesn't look at the idea that citizens have rights. And so digital citizens, part of being a digital citizen is to understand and exercise your rights. Well, what rights do you have? Well, you have rights as a citizen of a state, even if you're a minor. You have rights as members of a community. You have rights as a consumer, and naturally we all have rights as human beings. We know that young people actually are heavily civically engaged. In fact, according to a StatsCan study that was done in 2005, Canadians aged 15 to 24 have the highest rate of volunteerism. Those who are old enough to vote, young people between 18 and 24, don't vote as much as they used to, and they don't vote as much as older Canadians, but they do have strong interest in political issues. We found that more than a third of grade 4 to 11 students had joined or supported an activist group online. And remember, that starts in grade 4, so with the older students, that rises to quite a significant number. So it's not accurate to describe young people as disengaged or apathetic or cynical, although I'm sure they're all of those things at certain times. But overall, what we do see is that young people are interested and engaged at least as much as anyone else. So we'll talk about online democracy first, our rights as citizens of a state. We do know youth are participating in democracy through new modes of engagement. And one of the things about digital citizenship that makes it unique is that online we can be as much of a citizen as anyone else until it actually comes to a vote. You can participate in the conversation, you can participate in the debate. And there's evidence that we're seeing a resurgence in civic engagement through new media, and that social networks are becoming a focus of this. And certainly if you're active, particularly on Twitter, Twitter has really become, for many people, a focus of political activity. If you've seen some, for instance, if you've seen, any one of you have seen the Yes All Women hashtag around lately, that was a response to responses to the killings last week, where the killer seems to have been motivated by extreme misogynistic philosophy, and there was an immediate reaction online that's saying, well, not all men are like this, and the Yes All Women hashtag came about to say that, well, maybe not, men are not all like this, but yes, all women have experienced this. And it's a good example of how civic engagement online happens in a very organic way that's very different from offline. That's a really interesting question about news through social media. In fact, I don't have the numbers here, but we did ask them where they got their news. And in fact, social media was the highest rate. In fact, many of them share social media links. So they really are, or news links over social media. So they are engaged in the news, but they do use social media as one of their main channels. Unfortunately, we also know that social media is the context where they're least likely to authenticate information. That's in the digital media report, the digital literacy report, rather. So that's talking about democracy. When we talk about digital citizenship as understanding and exercising rights as members of a community, what do we mean? Well, to begin with, they have the right to participate in a community. They have a right to shape the norms and values of that community, and they have a right to participate in regulating the behavior of that community. And the important thing about all of these is that in order to exercise our rights, we need to know them. We need to know we have them. And a lot of young people don't know that they have these rights, particularly, as we'll see, when it comes to consumer rights, but also as members of a community. I'm going to type my Twitter handles because we have a question there. I'm doing the Media Smarts and my own. There we go. So let's start by when young people are participating online, media production, of course, that is, remember, one of our core elements of digital literacy was media creation. Media production and distribution can be a big part of how young people get engaged. Social networking, blogs, online forums Here's an example of youth self-regulation in communities, and that's gaming communities. Of course, we know that young people spend a lot of time in gaming communities, and we know there are issues there. Our own research found that a quarter of Canadian students say they've harassed someone in an online game. There is a lot of that happening. But at the same time, some research from Pew in the United States found 3/4 of students had seen someone asking an aggressor to stop. And 5 out of 6 said other players had been generous or helpful when playing. And one of the things that we've seen in research about behavior in online games is that it varies tremendously from game to game. And a lot of that is because, just like offline, games have cultures. They have cultures about what kind of behavior is acceptable and what the right way is to deal with unacceptable behavior. And that is one of the rights that young youth have, the right to participate in the regulation of their communities. And they have to understand that they don't just have to put up with negative behavior when they're in a virtual environment, whether it's a game or social network or anywhere else, but that they have rights as a member of that community. Another element of digital citizenship, their rights as consumers. Well, what rights do we have as consumers? To begin with, we have contract rights. When we use an online service, we're agreeing to a contract, and we have rights under that contract. There are also mechanisms for redress. There are legal mechanisms for redress that we have available to us, but also within the structure of that contract, there are usually mechanisms. And finally, outside of the contract, we have the right to apply consumer pressure. And that, again, is a right that people need to know they have, and young people need to know they have. Because so many of the environments young people use disguise the fact that they are corporate environments and disguise the fact that our relationships with them are contractual. When you're using a space like Facebook, for instance, they go out of their way to make it feel like a community, and they go out of their way to make you forget that you are in a fully corporate space. We asked students what their favorite websites are. In the top 10, only one in the top 10 websites was not a corporate space, and that was Wikipedia. Every other one was owned by a for-profit corporation. So, looking at contract rights, this is from our data. We know that young people don't know enough about their contractual rights. Obviously, we don't have to put it in that language, but we found 2/3 of students had never had a privacy policy, returns of service explained to them. It's just something that doesn't seem to be on anybody's radar. And as a result, we asked them a trick question. It was like whether or not they agreed with the statement. And 2/3 of students think that if a website has a privacy policy, it will not share their data. Now, of course, every website has a privacy policy because the privacy policy lays out how they will share your data, the terms under which they will share your data, and the ways in which you can control how they share your data. But if you believe that just having a privacy policy means they're not going to share your data, then obviously you're not going to take advantage of any of those tools, any of those mechanisms, and you're not going to be using it in full knowledge of how your data is being shared. Mechanisms for redress involve how you can influence the corporate space, how you can influence the corporate environment. So a lot of them do have mechanisms that you can use when you have a complaint, for instance, about content. So on YouTube, for instance, when you see something, this is a screenshot of a neo-Nazi band that has a number of videos on YouTube, you can flag it as inappropriate. On Facebook, there are actually quite a few robust tools for making complaints. In almost every virtual environment, every game, every virtual world, there are moderators. There are ways you can complain that actually often do make a difference. And so it's important for young people to know these, to understand that they do have some power to make a difference. And of course, consumer pressure. So when we're not able to work within the corporate environment, we have the ability to move outside of it, to organize people. And there have been a number of tremendously successful campaigns. And that's one of the things that the internet is great for, is organizing people because of its network nature. And it's one of these things that kids have an opportunity to do that. So this is one you can see where it was a protest against the show Toddlers and Tiaras. There have been a number of ones done specifically around online spaces as well. Facebook has been the subject of several different consumer pressure campaigns, and some of them have been quite successful. Finally, our last element of the rights of a digital citizen is digital citizens understand and exercise their human rights. When we talk about human rights with regard to young people, we're talking about the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Obviously, there are a number of different rights in there. We actually have on our website a lesson called Shaking the Movers, which is helping kids to learn about the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child overall. But when it comes to digital citizenship, there are 3 rights that I wanted to focus on. Freedom from discrimination, the right to be heard, and the right to education. Freedom from discrimination is a really significant one, because we know from our research that 3/4 of students have seen racist or sexist things online, and 60% of them report seeing this on a regular basis. So this is an issue, and we're not talking necessarily about organized hate groups, although that material definitely is out there, but a lot of this is peer created content, people just being racist and sexist to one another. Or just in general expressing racist or sexist attitudes. And again, young people need to understand that they have a right not to suffer from discrimination, and that they have tools at their disposal. The right to be heard is really important, and again, the internet gives us an opportunity to guarantee this right, to make sure that young people have this right, to give young people a voice, so that they will be engaged citizens. One of the reasons why young people tend to be turned off of traditional electoral politics is because they can't vote until they're 18, and so they feel disengaged from it. And one of the things we have to be careful of is keeping too tight a lid on how young people communicate online. And of course, it's a tremendous challenge, because one of the things we also have to do is teach kids to be responsible about how they communicate online. But we do have to give them a certain amount of freedom to speak. And of course, the right to education is central to digital citizenship and digital literacy. And when we look at the right to education, we don't just mean a basic education, we mean a meaningful education. What does that mean when it comes to digital literacy? We mean an education that reflects young people's digital lives. So the education they receive can't be something out of the 19th century. It has to reflect the fact that they are living online as much as they are living offline. Their education has to use digital technology to foster engagement and promote independence, to help them become active students. And we have to give students the freedom to make mistakes, and that comes back to the idea of management rather than broad filtering, and the means to correct them. So, of course, it's not enough just to throw them in the pool and say, good luck. We have to teach them how to fix mistakes when they make them. We know, again, from our research, particularly our focus groups, that youth are making good choices online, and they're using digital media in a lot of very proactive ways. And that's where we have to start. We have to build on that idea. We have to look at the things they're already doing. We have to promote them. Again, it comes back to social norming. When we give the young people a message that they're mostly using digital technology for bad things, for antisocial purposes, they're going to feel it's okay. Even if we think we're telling them this is bad, what they hear is not this is bad, what they hear is this is normal. When we promote good things, when we say, you know, not as many people as you think are sexting, not as many people as you think are forwarding sex, when we say the same thing about bullying, when we say, look at these things people are doing, these good things that people are succeeding in, they get that message. Some of you may not be familiar. Every year we have an event in November. The first full week of November is Media Literacy Week. Every year we have a different theme, and this year our theme is positive uses of social networking, because there are a lot of tremendous things happening that we want to promote and publicize. So now I'm going to take the last 5 or 6 minutes just to just to talk about some of our resources. So we have on our website a number of free digital literacy games, and they cover a really wide range, both in terms of the content and the age range. Up at the top left, you see one of our classics, Second Adventure of the Three Cyber Pigs. Is one of a couple of fun little games for younger kids. At the top right is one of our games for the very youngest kids. It's called Coco's Adversmarts, and it helps teach kids about online advertising. Because that's still really a huge issue. The amount of advertising that young people get exposed to online, I think, is one of those few things that is actually worse than most people tend to think. Down at the bottom left, we have a little interactive quiz that relates to one of our lessons about online hate. So it's teaching kids particularly to recognize online hate, teaching kids to tell the difference between hate speech and legitimate debate. Because really it's not the issues that we're discussing that make something hateful, but the way an argument is framed, the way it dehumanizes people, the way it uses scare tactics. Yes, Monique's quite right to point out that all of these resources are available in French and English. In fact, everything I'm talking about in the next few minutes is bilingual. And bottom right, we have another one that relates to hate and particularly to bias and stereotyping called Allies and Aliens, and that's for grades 7 and up. This is our online lesson library. If you're familiar with us, you've probably seen it. We have literally thousands of resources here. We have lesson plans, of course, for teachers are one of our top downloads. We have a huge range of lesson plans on every aspect you can imagine of digital and media literacy, and we're producing new ones all the time. You can also search for backgrounders, games, and tip sheets here. And also we have our curricular outcome charts, so you can take a look at the different courses for your province, and you can see which of our resources meet different curricular requirements for that course and grade level. So this is our way of making sure that media and digital literacy get into the classroom by showing that they're already in the curriculum. We have a number of free tutorials online that are available to anyone. This is designed for parents. We have a teacher's version coming out next year, but this one has a lot of good material. It's called Raising Ethical Kids for a Networked World, and it really does contain all of the key material about our digital citizenship approach of teaching kids empathy, or promoting empathy, teaching them moral reasoning, teaching them ethical thinking, and emotional regulation. And it looks at issues like cyberbullying, intellectual property, using that in an ethical way, plagiarism, handling other people's private material, and so on. Another one of our free online tutorials is our Diversity in Media Toolbox. And each one of these, there's 2 parts. That's Not Me, which is about diversity in media and facing online hate. Each one of those is a suite that has a professional development tutorial, and all of our PD tutorials are available either as a PowerPoint or as a self-directed tutorial with audio. Each of these also comes with a series of lesson plans and also one or more interactive quizzes or games that goes with it. And finally, we're turning to our licensed resources, since I know those have recently been made available to you. First, we have our Web Awareness Workshop series. You can see here Growing with the Net, which is one of them. This is a series of 6 workshops. Each of these are PD materials, and again, you can use them as a PowerPoint in a group, or you can use them yourself on your own as an interactive tutorial with audio. And they really cover everything that a teacher or administrator needs to know about these digital issues. So we have one about cyberbullying, one about online safety, one about privacy and marketing, one about authenticating online information, and then 2 called Growing with the Net, which look at young people's cognitive development and how that influences their media use, and particularly how that influences how we as adults need to approach their media use and how to help them handle that. We have 2 classroom tutorials that are being made available to you. These are basically educational computer games with evaluation components that are designed as holistic digital literacy tutorials, which means that they teach every aspect of digital literacy, but they also show how those aspects interrelate, and that's particularly true in the second one, as we'll see. So Passport to the Internet is for grades 4 to 8. As you can see, it takes an approach that really appeals to kids in that age, particularly the younger age. It's very cartoony, it's very friendly, it's very light. Again, there's no use of scare tactics. There's a lot of fun, but it's got real skills. So we have a social networking simulator where you create something like a Facebook profile and you get feedback on how much privacy you're giving out. There's an instant messaging simulator where you have a number of conversations where you have to decide what to say, dealing with things like stranger contact, cyberbullying, and so on. There's an authentication test where you look at a number of different websites about the same site, about the same topic, and you judge each one. You figure out which things help make something reliable or unreliable, or suggest something's reliable or unreliable. And then the secondary version of that is called My World. That's for grades 9 to 12. Again, teaching digital literacy skills, in this case, though, much more interrelated. And as you can see, the interface is something designed to appeal to kids, to teenagers particularly. It's much more realistic. And it reflects the way that teenagers use the internet. So instead of going to one place to do one thing, you've got at any given time a bunch of windows open, and a task might take you, you might start at your instant mail, take you to your social networking site. You may have to search something on your search engine, look at it, judge it, go back to instant mail, give an answer, may go to your live speak to get advice. So really, it's designed to reflect the way teens actually do use the internet. So we have, I think, a couple of minutes. If anyone has any questions, we can do them in the chat window. I think we've addressed all the ones that came up along the way, but if anyone has any questions now, we should have a couple of minutes to answer them. There's definitely a distinction, and in fact that's something we address on our site if you want to look at that question in more detail. I tend to think of them as things that overlap by about 80%. There are a few things about digital literacy that don't come from traditional media literacy, and there are a few things about media literacy that don't apply quite as much to digital literacy. But from my mind, they really are largely the same thing. Okay, Media Literacy Week is always the first full week in November. I don't remember what the actual dates are in this case. I don't have a calendar with me. But it would be that first full week, so it starts with the first Monday in November. We have a Media Literacy Week website, medialiteracyweek.ca. So in fact, if I just go over there and stop being lazy, I will be able to answer that question. A new keyboard, so I'm making a lot of typos. Okay, MediaLiteracyWeek.ca, November 3rd to 7th, 2014. Any other questions? This is also the Media Literacy Week website. That's MediaLiteracyWeek.ca. That's really our hub for Media Literacy Week. So when people are involved in it, because it's really more something that we coordinate more than anything else. So when people are involved in it, they report their events to us, and we promote them as they're coming up, and then we share them when they're happening and after they're happening. I'm guessing this most recent question is about the tutorials using anonymous names, or mostly they're real ones. In each of them, they don't really use names. They do use email addresses, because that's how we do the evaluation tools. Each of those tutorials tracks students' achievement in them, because a lot of teachers do like to use them for assessment or evaluation. And so students email those results through the tutorial to themselves and to their teachers. But we have a lot of strategies available in the teacher's guide for each one, for if teachers or students don't want to use their personal emails, they can use things like webmail services like Hotmail. Yes, you absolutely can put links in guides with attribution, certainly. We have no problem with anyone linking to any of our material. We're also pretty relaxed about people reprinting things so long as they get permission. But we approve a lot of reprints every year, because 95% of our stuff is just offered free as a public good. So I think that is coming up to the end of our time. If you think of any questions that you didn't get to ask me today, my email is, I'm just going to write it here. There's my email address. So please feel free to ask me any questions that you think of later, especially if you are trying to implement any of our tutorials. Feel free to ask me any questions that you have. And thank you all so much. It's been a real pleasure and a privilege to get to chat with you.
I just want to thank Matthew here for a really great presentation. Lots of great information shared, and I used the media awareness materials in the past with my teacher ed students, and they've been always great. So I'm looking forward to digging into the new ones as well. So appreciate everyone's time here, and especially you, Matthew. Thank you for coming out and volunteering your time to speak about media smarts and digital literacy in general, because I think you've provided, I think, a really parallel thread to a lot of what we were talking about. So it's great to see that the sort of the media organization in Canada is very much in the same on the same page with much of the research that we're seeing out there as well. So fantastic. So again, thanks again, and take care, everyone, and have a great night.